Sustainable mobility is a key challenge for Mediterranean regions, especially in rural and peri-urban areas with limited public transport. Through the ArtMED project, co-funded by Interreg Euro-MED, partners created MOBI, a digital tool supporting the planning of demand-responsive and autonomous mobility on-demand services. MOBI helps authorities and planners design efficient, inclusive and sustainable transport systems tailored to local needs. You can simulate services, estimate costs and assess performance, all in one intuitive platform. Let's get started.
Hello everybody, welcome to this tutorial in which I will present to you the .MOBI tool, which is a decision support tool for DRT and AMoD services. .MOBI was created within the scope of the ArtMED project under Interreg Euro-MED, which is co-founded by the European Union. Here we are on the welcome page of the project, and you can see that you have information on what the tool can do. Basically, it's a user-friendly tool designed to support policymakers, public transit operators and mobility planners in evaluating their demand-responsive transit or autonomous mobility on-demand services. With the tool, we can easily estimate fleet size, calculate the total cost of ownership of our service, assess key performance indicators such as cost per passenger per kilometer, cost per vehicle per kilometer, project revenue streams from ticketing to subsidies to other sources, and at last evaluate the service financial viability through a net present value analysis. In this welcome page, you can see here in the bottom that we provided also a PDF user manual in which guide you step by step on how to use the application. Thereby, feel free to download it. You can simply do it by clicking in this button and you will be able to access the manual. The first thing to be done when starting using .MOBI is signing up by clicking this button right here. And by doing so, all you have to do is provide a valid email address and a password. As I have already created my own, I will simply log in. So I will click on login, and then I am redirected to my projects. In that case, I have already created a project in which we are going to be using as an example for this tutorial. But if you are just starting to use the application, you will be able to add your new project. Projects can be added freely, and there are no limits to the number of projects that you can create. Meaning you can add different projects with different vehicle configurations, with different fleet size, with different financial analysis for a same service. And in the end, you can export each of the PDF files generated by the tool and compare among your different projects so you can have a more informed decision on which one is the best fit for your project. So in that case, as I explained, we are going to use the example of Veridian, which is a fictional case that we created for this tutorial. And the scope is to deliver rural elderly mobility service. And I will explain to you in a little bit more when we access the project. Welcome to the second video of this tutorial. Now let's access and understand how each tab of the .MOBI tool shall be completed and used. As I explained, we are starting from a fictional case called Veridian, and I have already completed the tabs, so I will guide you through each one of them and what are the elements that you should complete and pay attention to. So let's start by clicking Access. And as you can see, we are on the first interface of our .MOBI tool. You can see right here in the very top that the tool is composed by different tabs in which you have to complete with your data. The first one is called Regional Data. The second one, service quality. Third one, fleet sizing. Next, internal costs, externalities, KPIs, revenues, and net present value. Those tabs can be completed in a logical sequence, or if you wish, you can come back and readjust the elements as you need, as you see fit. So let's start with the first one, which is regional data. This is the first contextualization element that we need for you to complete in order to have an assessment of your service. In regional data, we are asking the characteristics of the area in which the on-demand mobility service will be implemented. As you can see here, we have a few elements that shall be completed, the first one being the country. Here we have selected France, in a sense that our fictional city of origin is located in the south coast of France alongside the Mediterranean Sea, and it's a small city which lacks public transportation for rural areas. So here we selected the country of France. You can pick a country from the list of the countries provided. We have all countries in Europe, and you, of course, can use it outside Europe as well. But I will explain in a little bit more details why the list of countries here are only presented for Europe. So, once we have selected our country, we are going to define the operating diameter. In that case, we are considering a diameter of 12 kilometers in which the service will be deployed. This can be, of course, changed by clicking up and down. It's extremely straightforward and easy to complete. The same goes for the other data that you have to complete. Please be mindful that in each of the data entry points, if you are a little bit confused on what they are and how you should complete them, note that there's a little question mark, and when you click on them, there is a little help window that pops up to give you more information on how to complete each of those elements. Okay, so now we have completed our operating diameter. We are now going to set our average trip speed. Here I selected 30 kilometers an hour, which is the average for peri-urban areas in France. You can move it, of course, up or down as you see fit. In our case, we have selected 30. The next thing you have to do is to complete information about the operating hours of your service. You can select by enabling or not peak hours operations. In that case, we are choosing our service to be operated for a total of 8 hours during the day. From those, 2 hours being considered peak hour operations and 6 hours considering off-peak hour of operations. If by any chance you don't need to specify or to make a difference between peak and off-peak hours, you can simply not select the peak hour option and then simply complete the total hours of your service. In our case, we are selecting peak hours, and I've completed with the information here. And you are going, of course, to complete after the expected number of users for a daily operation of your service. In our case, we selected around 300 users for the peak hours, 50 users for off-peak, totaling 350 people for the service. The final data you have to complete in this first tab is how many days of the year are you going to be offering the service. In our case, we selected 253, which are all working days on France, excluding weekends and public holidays. Once you are happy with the information you provided, you simply click Save, and by doing so, you will be redirected to the second tab of our application. So let me click Save, and with that, we are automatically on our second tab, which is called Service Quality. On service quality, you are simply going to complete two elements, those being maximum waiting time and the flexibility based on that waiting time. Maximum waiting time means that once a user demands or hails the service, how long is the maximum waiting time that he's willing to wait for the vehicle to pick him up? In that case, we selected 15 minutes with a 25% flexibility margin. Again, the tool is extremely flexible. You can make changes and tweak these variables as you see fit, allowing you to simulate different scenarios. So in our case, we are selecting a 15-minute maximum waiting time with a 25% service flexibility. I'm going to click Save, and by doing so, we are going to be redirected to the third tab of our application, which is the fleet sizing for our service. So here we are on the fleet sizing, and as you can see, the information is already pre-completed, but if you are starting from scratch, there is a few data in which you need to provide. The first one is whether or not you already have a fleet of vehicles, because we can be in a situation in which you are already a service provider, a public transport operator, and you have vehicles that are available to you. So you don't need to create new demand or to buy new vehicles. In that case, you can simply click the button called Existing Fleet and precise how many vehicles do you have. In our case, I am considering that the service is brand new and we have no vehicles available for that service. So I am not selecting an existing fleet. I am starting from scratch. Next, we have to select what types of vehicles are we going to be using in the service. Here you have two options. You can select between an electric bus or an internal combustion engine bus, an ICE bus. In that case, I'm selecting an electric bus. The next point is to select the capacity of that bus. In that case, we are considering a little shuttle of 8 people. You can adapt and change it to your local reality to be more or less. And then you have to select how many hours a day that vehicle will be made available. So imagine that you have a service that has a very long time span during the day. Maybe your vehicle will not be operational for the entire duration of your service. Maybe it has to get out of service to be refilled or to be recharged, and then you can select this criteria right here. So in that case, I am leaving as it is, and when I click Calculate, it will provide me with the fleet size, as you can see in this table right here. As we have selected on the Regional Data tab that we are enabling peak hours and off-peak hours activity, .mobi provides us with a tailor-made fleet size. It gives you what would be the ideal fleet size to serve peak hours, to serve off-peak hours, and provide you with an average over the day. And you can select which of those options are you going to be using to calculate the internal costs, the externalities, and the revenues in the next tabs. In our case, I will be selecting simply by clicking here in the bottom, the average. So as you can see, I click on the button which is called average, and here we are going to be using the data available in the yellow part of our table. You can simply change it if you wish by selecting peak hours, by selecting off-peak, or like I said, you can do it by selecting the average. Another possibility that you have in the fleet sizing is to add a different fleet. So for example, we here have added a fleet of electric vehicles with a capacity of 8 people per vehicle. But I can, for example, create a new one by clicking in this button right here in the bottom. I can add a new fleet, and I can start the process all over again, either if I am using an existing fleet or if I am starting from scratch, let's say with an internal combustion engine bus with a vehicle capacity of 20 and being available for longer hours during the day. And then once I do it, I can click Save and Evaluate, and it will provide me again with a new table of this specific fleet size requirement. So, as you can see, the tool is extremely flexible, allowing you to use your existing fleet, to create new ones, or even to create fleets with different types of vehicles. I am going to delete that fleet because we are going to use the example of an electric bus, and with that I can simply save and evaluate and move on to our next tab, which is going to be the calculation of internal costs. So I am going to click here on internal costs calculation, and you can see, of course, the information is already pre-completed, but if you are using the service for the first time, you are presented with all those possibilities to simulate how much you are going to be needing in terms of investments and in terms of operating expenditures. The first thing you have to select here is if you are using the default fleet size, so 9 vehicles, or if you are going to be using a custom fleet. In our case, we are going to come back because I forgot to click. We are going to use the average of 5 vehicles. So let's save and evaluate. And with that, we are using the average of 5 vehicles for calculating our. So welcome to the second part of our tutorial. As I was explaining in my previous video, we are now completing the internal cost tab of the .mobi tool, and here we are selecting the custom fleet size of 5 vehicles, which was the average that we calculated in the fleet sizing tab right before. And I am simply selecting 5 vehicles, which is the average provided. I click in Modify, and it takes into account that my size is not the 9 vehicles provided for the peak capacity, but rather 5 vehicles as I am using the average. Okay, once I am happy with this information, I can move on to the CAPEX and to the OPEX part of my data collection. CAPEX means capital expenditures, which are, of course, the costs incurred as capital investment. As you can see here, we have already a list of predetermined CAPEX sources, for example, vehicle procurement or vehicle purchasing, investments in terms of facilities, investments in charging infrastructure, branding and marketing, regulatory compliance, training and hiring, and if you have something specific to your case, you can add a CAPEX field and, of course, detail what exactly is this investment cost, and you can add as many as you like and detail as many as you wish. And another possibility that you have here is to define if that cost is going to be applied per vehicle, per kilometer, per passenger, or per fleet. In that case, I am considering that we are going to be purchasing 5 new vehicles in a cost of 180,000 euros per vehicle. Some operators, they operate in a per kilometer metric or in a cost per passenger metric. In that matter, you can simply change the values here and select the option that better corresponds to your needs. I am making the calculation simpler, so I am not considering costs with facilities. I am considering a cost of 300,000 euros in terms of charging infrastructure. In that case, not per vehicle but per fleet. And then I am adding a little other revenue sources just to make the example more compelling. Once you are happy with this data completion, you can do the same thing for your yearly operational expenditures. In that case, you can select how much you will be spending on a yearly basis in terms of costs. And here again, you have different pre-created categories. The first one are costs with the vehicle, which comprise how much is spent on insurance, maintenance and repairs, fuel or electricity costs, rentals, lease payments, etc. You can consider driver salary as well, other personal costs, technology and infrastructure, other generic operational costs, administrative costs, etc. And of course, similar to the CapEx one, you can add OpEx fields as you see fit, and you can complete them based on your needs. Similar to the CapEx completion as well, you can select those costs per kilometer, per passenger, per vehicle, or per fleet. Once you are happy with your data completion, the .mobi tool already gives you a few results. So it gives you the breakdown of your CapEx and of your OpEx, and by simply sliding the mouse, you can see how much you are spending in terms of CapEx and how much you are spending on a yearly basis in terms of OpEx. I forgot to mention, but of course, you have to complete also the depreciation years, which are in how long your capital investment will be depreciated. In that case, we selected 8 years, but again, similar to everything else in the platform, you can change it, you can adapt to your needs. Once you are happy with this data completion, you can simply click Save and Process and move on to the next tab, which is called Externalities. So by clicking on the next tab of Externalities, there is no data completion to be done. Why? Because the externalities are calculated based on the country that you have selected in the first tab of this application. Externalities are costs which are not bared by the public transport operator themselves, meaning those are costs that are not CapEx or OpEx. Externality costs for transport are bared by the society as a whole, meaning costs with accidents, with pollution, with congestion, with noise, and etc. And we included this category here in the analysis to give you not only an overview of how much the service will cost to the operator, but also what would be the impact on the local community in terms of accidents, air pollution, noise, congestion, and so on. This data is calculated based on the external Handbook of Externalities, which is published by the European Commission, and it is available for all countries in the European Union. Reason why, when we come back to the first tab, which is called Regional Data, you can select all the countries in the European Union, but unfortunately, this data of externality is not available for countries outside of the European Union yet, which means that if you are an operator outside of Europe, you can still use the .mobi tool. It will present you all the results that you need, but unfortunately, for the time being, the data about the externalities won't be made available to you, as this data is not yet published for other countries. So here you can see that I have the results of my externalities for a fleet size of 5 vehicles, and based on all the information that I have computed before. And you can see that the country of reference is France. I am considering an electric bus, and the calculation cost is for the year 2024, which is the last complete fiscal year available in terms of the World Bank data for inflation. So all this cost is calculated based on the last year's inflation. So if you are in 2025, the data will be calculated based on 2024. If you are in 2026, it will be calculated based on 2025. So you can have here several indicators. For example, how much the service will entail in terms of accident costs. And you have this data per passenger per kilometer, per vehicle per kilometer, and how much it will be in terms of total per year. So you have the breakdown for all the different external costs that are bared by society for the service you have envisioned, and then you have the total costs in terms of externalities for your service as well. This is interesting because this type of analysis is an analysis that is important to be taken into account by different stakeholders on a municipal level, and to consider what would be the global impact in terms of externalities by implementing this service in your area. So once you are done with your externality analysis, the next tab presents you with the KPIs for your service. So here again, there is no data completion to be made. Simply analyze the results that are given to you, and those are results considering all the data you have entered so far. For example, we are considering a fleet size of 5 vehicles, and we have the total number of passengers per year, the average kilometers per year that my service will be operating on. And then you can have, of course, the total CapEx cost for my service, the depreciation period that is calculated in 8 years, how much I will be spending in terms of operational expenditures per year, my average vehicle occupancy rate, and then what matters the most to most public transport operators are those lines right here, which are cost per vehicle per kilometer and cost per passenger per kilometer. And you have this data with and without the externalities. If I am analyzing without the externality, I am considering the total cost of ownership, how much the service will cost to me as a public transport operator. If I am analyzing it with the externalities, I am considering the total cost of mobility, which means the costs for me as an operator, but also for me as a community in terms of a decision-making process, as externalities are costs bared by the community and not by the operators themselves. And as you can see here, for our service in hand, we have a total cost per vehicle per kilometer of €2.44 and a total cost per passenger per kilometer of €0.55. This is without considering the externalities. If you want to analyze with the externalities, just look at the two other lines in this page. So those are the results that are available to us so far. You have details about the externalities, you have details about your key performance indicators for the provided service, and now .mobi gives you the possibility to simulate what would be your revenue sources for your servers in order to cover such costs. With that, we are going to click on the next tab, which is called Revenues. And similar to all the other data completion, you see here that you have a list of options of revenue sources that you can envision for your service. For example, ticketing, subsidies, financing from companies, advertising revenue, data commercialization revenue, and even funding from the European Union or other programs can also be envisioned. If there's something else that you are considering for your service, you can, of course, add a new revenue stream, detail it, and, of course, precise the values that you are envisioning for such revenue stream. In our case, we are not considering that. I am considering for this hypothetical example that the service will not be free. It will cost €2.50 per passenger. So again, you can select if the revenue source will be applied per kilometer, per passenger, per vehicle, or per fleet. In that case, we are considering €2.50 per passenger. We are considering a subsidy of €750,000 per fleet. This is something that we are also including in our calculation. No financing from companies, no revenue from advertising, no revenue from data commercialization, and also EU funding of €300,000. Again, we have selected the option per fleet. Similar to what has been done in terms of analysis for CAPEX and OPEX, you have here as well the breakdown analysis for your eventual potential revenue sources, and you have a table detailing what would be those sources in an yearly basis. Once you are happy with these results, you click Evaluate Revenue, and you are ready to move to the final tab of the .MOBI calculation tool, which is called Net Present Value. So, Net Present Value is a calculation, or it is a tool of capital budgeting to analyze if a project is profitable or not. Which means that we are going to give an indicator in the end, and if that indicator is higher than 0, it means that your cash flows surpasses your cost sources and your service is profitable. If the results are negative or inferior than 0, this means that your service is not profitable. So in this page, you can see an explanation of how the net present value is calculated. In our case, I am going to let you read at home, but bear in mind that this calculation is already integrated in the tool. All you have to complete is details on what would be your expected interest rate per year, what would be the expected growth rate of your service per year, and in how many years would you like to evaluate the economic calculation of net present value. In our example, I have selected 2% interest rate per year, 2% growth, and to be analyzed in an interval of 2 years. By clicking on Evaluate Net Present Value, we can see that for this specific scenario, our result is positive, which means that our cash inflows cover the total service costs. This means that for the provided example, our service is profitable. But bear in mind that several services in terms of DRT and in terms of AMoD may not necessarily be profitable from year 1. Mainly as public transport is a right of the population and shall be provided by the state, by the city, not necessarily having the need to be profitable from year 1. In any case, in our simulation, it is profitable, but again, this doesn't mean that this result is the only outcome available for the tool. So basically that is it. I believe with this tutorial you have a good overview on how .MOBI works. You can come back anytime you want and change values, change data entries, reanalyze each of the tabs and adapt and fine-tune the calculations based on your specific needs, based on your specific requirements. For example, imagine that in our case, I am considering here for internal costs that I have no drivers' salaries, which means that my service is going to be provided by autonomous electric vehicles. If I have no driver's salaries, it means that I have no drivers. So as you can see, with this flexibility, you can calculate or you can simulate the economic feasibility of your service for standard DRT with drivers or with automated mobility on demand by simply not completing driver salaries and other operational costs that you do not think will be implemented if the service is provided by autonomous vehicles. So that would be all from my part. I hope I was somewhat clear in my explanation, and I wish you very good analysis and projects by using .mobi tool, which is again available to you free of charge in any device that has connection to the internet, so you can use it, so you can experiment, you can try, you can simulate your need based on your local specificities. Thank you very much and have a good one.
You've just completed the .mobi tutorial, a tool that makes mobility planning smarter, greener, and more inclusive. Developed within the ArtMED project and co-funded by Interreg Euro-MED, .mobi helps authorities and planners simulate scenarios and make data-driven decisions. Learn more and join us in advancing sustainable mobility across the Mediterranean.